Welcome to Betrayal Trauma Recovery. This is Anne. It's just me today. If you just found out about your husband's lies and you're wondering, is my husband addicted to whatever he was lying about? Here's what you really need to know. If you caught your husband lying and then your husband said, I'm addicted to, and he claims he's struggling with addiction, the truth might be that it's not actually about addiction in relation to you. It's actually about emotional and psychological abuse. Here's what you need to know about addiction in marriage. Addiction might seem like a reasonable explanation for why your husband lies. But if your husband's actions hurt your peace and confidence, it's important to focus on how they affect you, and this shift will change everything. Because if your husband repeatedly chooses behaviors that hurt you, this is about more than his quote-unquote personal struggle. Because lies aren't addiction. Lies are emotional and psychological abuse. So if your husband is lying to you and his excuse is that he's an addict, ask yourself this question. Does he take responsibility for the pain he's caused, or does he make excuses, shift blame, or manipulate you to feel sorry for him? Because addiction does not justify him lying to you about his whereabouts, playing the victim so you'll feel sorry for him when you're actually a victim of his lies, when you're actually the one that's been harmed. It doesn't justify hiding money or denying conversations or gaslighting when you ask questions. It doesn't justify psychological abuse in the form of telling you you're too sensitive or that you're blowing something out of proportion. Because what he's done is really serious. These actions aren't the slips of an addict. They're actually tactics that emotional abusers use to maintain control. So let's talk specifically about addiction and why pornography is an abuse issue. Educating women about this type of abuse is so vital because so many women are dealing with this. I have a master's degree in education. I'm an abuse educator, and I've interviewed over 200 women who are going through this. I've also been through it myself. When it comes to this type of abuse, it's not a situation where what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. In this case, it harms you and it limits your ability to function and feel joy for a really long time. From personal experience, I know that it's absolutely miserable to find out for yourself why this is an abuse issue. It's extremely difficult to learn how to protect yourself from this type of abuse because most victims in this situation are given the wrong information about what's going on. So that's my intent today. I don't want any woman who's going through this to not know exactly what's happening or what to do. So let's start with this. Is a form of sexual abuse. There are many reasons why, and I outline all of those in my upcoming book. When it comes out, you can get a link in the show notes. I'm going to work from the outside in as we go over these reasons. So reason number one, fuels trafficking, and most is actual video evidence of a victim's coercion, assault. The industry will tell you that women are happy to be abused. They'll tell you that they've quote unquote consented, but they've been coerced. And what has been used to coerce them? It's money. There is no woman in the world who would want to be violently attacked, because that's what most is today. I'm a feminist, and there are some feminists out there who say that quote unquote sex work somehow empowers women, and I totally disagree. Women have contracted diseases, they've been physically harmed, and they're emotionally broken by this toxic quote unquote work environment. Anyone who insists that is empowering to women is not operating from a trauma-informed perspective. They're not considering the psychological grooming, emotional manipulation, and verbal manipulation that women encounter in the industry. There's a general naivety among the mass consumers of about how things really work. Talking with the amazing team at the National Center for Exploitation, I've learned over the years, and also interviewing several trafficking victims, the statistics are that if you've watched over 30 minutes, you're guaranteed to have seen someone who is there against their will. Even if somebody thinks they're watching quote unquote ethical or free trade, there's like a ton of euphemisms out there. It's not true. The women who are entrapped in this type of slavery are considered products. Their bodies are used and sold as products. So if someone is viewing, they're getting pleasure from someone else's abuse, and there's no healthy way to do that. The second reason why is an abuse issue is that as a wife, my husband's abuse was abusive to me. Abuse is directly tied to a loss of intimacy, reduced empathy, and overall addictive and aggressive behaviors. The effect on his brain, his emotions, on his capacity for empathy is a net negative. My husband's abuse didn't, and no husband's abuse makes him more compassionate or kind or capable with connecting with other people, especially not me, his wife. The use of is outside of marriage. Men don't just use because it generally includes. They also lie, deceive, and manipulate their wives in order to be able to do it without their wives knowing. So their wife generally doesn't have an idea about how much they're using or how much time they are spending It takes time to use, like 15 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, however long that it takes. So this is time that they're taking away from helping out with housework, childcare, doing their job. They're not thinking about how they can help their wife, how they can reduce their wife's mental load, none of that. What they're really thinking about is, how can I get privacy so that I can use. They're not thinking, how can I help my wife? What are the kids up to today? What time is carpool? In fact, he's probably thinking, it's my wife's job to do all the childcare and housework. So if she asks me questions about what I'm doing or expects anything from me, like, how dare she? It's my right to have time to myself to view these videos of women being abused and get off. There's some really good research on this at the National Center for Exploitation about how use escalates over time. And so it takes more and more intense material for a man to be able to. So over time, he's either going to need to increase the amount that he uses or escalate how graphic it is in order to get the job done. My personal belief is this should be between two people for the purpose of connection and love. For a user, that's not what it's about. It's about basically in front of a computer when using. There's no reason to pay attention to the other person's feelings. It's just all take. There's absolutely no give. And that's the third reason that use is a domestic abuse issue. It destroys what's meant to be shared in love in marriage or a committed relationship and turns it into something that you experience alone. So it destroys that relationship. It's not just abuse because the people who are in the are being abused. It's not just abusive because when he's using, he has no empathy and he lacks care for other people. He uses up all his mental energy to figure out lies and manipulation so that he can get time alone in order to actually do it. So here's the third reason that he is abusive. He's actually abusing the relationship. A marriage relationship is intended to be a caring, loving, equally respectful relationship where people are relating to each other out of care for each other. But a user is not operating from that perspective. Someone who is abusive is operating more as if it's a transactionship. So for example, he'll think, I just need to say the right words in order to get alone or whatever result that he's looking for. So he might say, oh, you look so beautiful today. I love you so much. You're amazing. Which makes it so much easier to follow up with, I'm so grateful that you're supportive of my job. I'm so sorry I have to work late tonight. Women will likely not know that's a lie. Instead, he's in his office with the door locked and he lied so the kids don't bother him, so his wife doesn't bother him, so he can do whatever he wants in there. He's abusing the relationship because he sees it as a series of transactions and he's using deceit to make those transactions. So what do I need to say to get what I want? Personally, I think using is because it's giving time, energy, or loyalty to something other than your wife. The solution to this type of abuse in a relationship isn't to say, oh, well, if we watch together, then I'm not abusing the relationship because we're doing it together. No, doing something super unhealthy and abusive together isn't going to make the relationship healthy. The addiction recovery industrial complex would rather that we say that is an addiction than abuse. And I disagree. I think it's domestic abuse. It should be called abuse. And the only thing anyone in the addiction recovery industrial complex should say to a victim of this type of abuse is, I'm so sorry, you're a victim of domestic abuse. You haven't done anything wrong. Focus on protecting yourself. Whether it's addictive or not is not the issue in my mind. It's a choice your husband is making. Day in and day out, what he thinks about, how he spends his time. And if he's been doing this for years, this is who he's become. The lying, the deception, the manipulation, all of this has become his character. And that's what people mean when they say he's abusive, meaning he has an abusive character. It's important to know that abuse is a character issue because to victims, much of the abuse, much of the psychological and emotional abuse is in the form of deception. And it feels really good. That type of manipulation is going to make a victim feel cared for and appreciated, even though it's manipulation. This is also sometimes called grooming or hoovering. So if your husband has this type of abusive character, the only reason that he chooses to use grooming that makes you feel good is to achieve a goal, not because he actually genuinely cares. And his goal is often to hide the truth or exploit you. This type of emotional and psychological abuse is dangerous. It's dangerous even if he's manipulating you through kindness. Of course, it's more obvious if he's manipulating through threats or overt forms of emotional and psychological abuse. I don't think that addiction recovery industrial complex, sometimes known as the addiction recovery industry. I don't think they correctly identify what this is. They don't say he has an abusive character. They attribute everything to his addiction and sometimes imply that he's a victim of his addiction. And so you can't really be his victim in that case. They're going to say that addiction is a disease. And so the logical outcome for a wife in this situation is thinking that her husband has a disease and that she needs to be supportive and help him out. Like he's a cancer patient and he needs her support. But he has a choice. This isn't the same thing as cancer or a disease. Men who use are not helpless. The bigger question is, can they see women as equals? Can they see women as humans who deserve respect? Can they realize that other humans were not made to be exploited or used? And that our feelings matter just as much as his. If he wants to have, and I don't want to, those two things are equal. People go on and on about how terrible a marriage is, but isn't a coerced full marriage worse? Because if he's lying about anything related to in order to maintain his privileges within the marriage, that's coercion. Or if you ever just feel obligated or like it's your duty, or that if you don't do it, something bad will happen, which is what a lot of women feel in their marriages. That's coercion. Coercion in marriage is way worse than a marriage. The truth is, if your husband is lying about his abuse, he's an adult, he has choices. If we can put time and thought into how to improve our marriage, so can he. If we can figure this out, he can figure it out. He knows how to act appropriately because he's kind in public. He knows what to do because he's acted that way privately in order to groom us. And instead of actually being kind, he chooses to be kind as a manipulation tactic. He doesn't have an integrity disorder. He just doesn't have integrity. For so long, I was supporting my husband's addiction recovery. I wasn't seeing him as abusive. I was viewing everything he did through the lens of addiction. And that's exactly why I wrote the Living Free workshop, so that I could teach women all the things that I needed to know that no one else told me, to help you see what's actually happening so that you can learn to differentiate between his lies and the truth. The way I talk about abuse, it's actually mainstream. If you went to your local domestic abuse services and you explained the manipulation and the lies and the deception and the disrespect you're experiencing at home, those domestic abuse experts would call it domestic abuse. They would confirm that you're experiencing abuse. It's not like I've invented this out of nowhere. These are very typical, classic, emotionally and psychologically abusive behaviors. It's just that if you approach it from an addiction recovery point of view, no one's going to say he is abusive and you are an abuse victim. It's very unlikely that's how they're going to view the situation. I think the main reason is that if a woman knows it's abuse and she knows she needs to focus on protecting herself, she wouldn't be making a lot of appointments. She probably wouldn't be managing his addiction recovery. She would be focusing on what she needed to do to make sure she was emotionally and psychologically safe. If an addiction professional was an abuse expert, he would know that this abusive man is going to be manipulating, coercing, and exploiting his wife. From what I see of the addiction recovery treatment models, they always want to include the wife. And in fact, sometimes say, if you're not included, it's going to be really hard for him to recover, which I think is completely unethical. So if he lies and says he's addicted to, and you end up going to addiction recovery, the likelihood of you paying tens of thousands of dollars for him to string you along and exploit you and manipulate you is extremely high, because addiction treatment in general does not give the wives of these men any way to protect themselves, and also discourages them from making decisions that would protect themselves. Often they'll say something like, don't make any decisions for a year. I think it's because addiction professionals know that if she's not involved, he likely won't go to therapy anymore, and then they wouldn't have any clients. Where addiction therapy might be helpful to someone who thinks they're an addict is if he's found the program, he goes and his wife isn't involved in any way, shape, or form. So if his wife has scheduled the appointments, if his wife found the therapist, if she's managing his treatment in any way, it's only because she wants to be safe. So she's not doing anything wrong. The fault is in the professionals who don't let her know, hey, this is an abuse situation. It's unethical for me to involve you. Because if he intended to change, he would have gone on his own no matter what. He wouldn't have only claimed he was an addict after she caught him using. We're all capable of getting therapy for things that we need help with. So is he. He's always been capable of getting help. After interviewing over 200 women on my podcast, one of the things I've noticed is that addiction professionals want the wife to be involved and they don't let people know, that's one of the biggest indicators that he's not going to change, is if his wife made the appointments and if his wife is managing his treatment. I think the whole thing is a racket. So if you've been listening at this point, you're like, is there no hope for my marriage? Is there no treatment for my husband? I totally understand. I went through this same thought process for 7 years. I don't know of any woman who hasn't tried to go to couple therapy or get their husband help in this situation. So if you have done that, good job. Going for help is what any healthy person would do. In fact, maybe you've already tried addiction therapy and you're wondering, is there another program or is there something else that we can try to help improve our marriage when my husband's been lying to me? You might think you just haven't found the right program yet. My Living Free workshop is about a 2-hour and 50-minute runtime. And the intent is to teach you all the things you need to know so that if you decide to go to couple therapy or if you decide to do addiction treatment, you'll be able to predict what's going to happen and whether or not it's going to work for you. The Living Free workshop is a lot less money and a lot less time than spending 3-4 years in addiction therapy or couple therapy only to realize that it didn't work. So getting this information first before you go, if you want to go, is really important. The workbook is incredible. It will really help you process what's happening and how you feel about it. There's no goal with it, so there's nothing where I'm like, this is what you should do. It's more like getting in touch with yourself and how you feel so you can make decisions that protect you from further abuse. So all the knowledge in the Living Free workshop is intended to save you a lot of money and time and also just work and pain. Because if he doesn't have an abusive character and couple therapy or addiction recovery is going to help you, you'll be able to see that really clearly from the workshop. I don't want any woman to go through what I went through, which is 7 years of trying to get help while I was being abused and no one identifying what was happening and even making things worse for me. So just to review, use and behaviors associated with addiction are abusive for 3 reasons. Number 1 is trafficking. Number 2, because it's abusive to your spouse. And number 3, because it's abusive to the relationship. I can't tell you how many women I've talked to over the years, like a ton. And they've told me that once they got this information, once they understood the strategies in the Living Free workshop, once they found out how to determine if he really does have an abusive character, everything changed in their life for the better. The vibe in their home improved and they were finally able to get some traction. That's my hope for you too. To get the Living Free workshop, go to btr.org/livingfree. And to hear the interviews that I've done, you can listen to my podcast, which you're doing right now. You can go to btr.org/podcast.